The Just Word podcast is brought to you by Justwealth Financial. Money Sense magazine ranks Justwealth as the best robo-advisor in Canada in 2024. And the Globe and Mail says that for the third straight year, Justwealth had the highest 5-year after-fee annualized total returns for the growth portfolio. Justwealth, investing the way it should be, just for you. Laura, a real pleasure to meet you. Tell me, what is Canage?
Canage is Canada's national seniors advocacy organization. So a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that looks to support really all Canadians as we age, not just older people.
Okay. And then you've written a lovely book. It's like a guideline with checklists and the whole thing. But what prompted you to write it?
I've been working in the field for more than 25 years, and I've never had that book to give people when they start to worry about things. And often, as we all know, whatever you are confronted with as your worry is not necessarily the only worry you have. And as you kind of delve into it, there's many, many more layers just lurking beneath the surface. So if you think about how many books we have for pregnancy or baby and toddler years, uh, you know, upon thousands. And yet, really, that's about generously 5 years that you really need all of that practical advice from pregnancy to maybe heading off to school. If you think about your aging parents, and particularly grandparents or even great grandparents, that can be up to 40 years these days. So there was never a handbook. I finally wrote it.
Well, and it's written very humorously. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I'll tell you, it was almost like you had a window into our household. Amazing. I want to focus on the financial aspect because that's what the
Sure.
podcast is about. And in particular, we started as a family with wills and estates, writing the
Sure.
will, writing the estate, and power of attorney, which I think is fascinating as well. What are your thoughts there?
It's critically important. These are the building blocks on decision making. So a couple of things. You have to be mentally capable to make any of these documents. So some people will say, dad's in and out of a coma and he's mentally incapable. We got to get him to make his documents. No, it's you got to scratch your head a little bit. You're like, probably it's going to be a little bit late.
That
So
door is shut.
exactly. So, every jurisdiction in the country's got rules about when you could start, but for property decisions, usually 18. And yet, you know, generously, a third of Canadians have powers of attorney, and generously, half report that they have wills. I think we should be very skeptical of those numbers. And if they have them, it doesn't mean they're correct or up to date. So a power of attorney, for your health and personal care decisions only kicks in if you are mentally incapable. So imagine you're in a coma, someone needs to make a decision for you, and that's fine. When it comes to property decisions, you've got two choices. You can make the kind of power of attorney that's active right away, which is what most people do. So if anything happens, you could just have someone step in and out, and then it continues on past the point of mental incapacity. Or you can have the kind that stays asleep, kind of like when you get your credit card in the mail, but you can't use it until you've activated it, and then you can activate it. And there's different ways that you can activate it, but usually mental capacity assessments are required to activate it. Powers of attorney exist as long as you're alive. The minute you die, their power dies with them. And then that's when the will kicks in.
Okay, but who has control actually? Suppose your parent makes one financial decision of some kind, and you, as the acting power of attorney, make a different one. Who actually has control?
Well, there's a practical answer to that and actually a legal answer. So legally, the person who is acting as a power of attorney, so imagine they are a power of attorney for property, but you are still mentally capable. So they're just helping you out, right? Maybe you're hiking in the Himalayas, you need someone to do something, and they go in and they do it, they're acting on your behalf. You can counter that um by saying no, actually, right? As long as you're mentally capable, you can step in and reverse it, or you can revoke the power of attorney. If you are no longer mentally capable of revoking that document, you're in the hands of whoever did it.
Oh, wow. Okay. Good to know. Let's talk about the actual aging at home process. And you create tremendous scenarios of how people have conversations with aging at home. Where do you start a conversation? Your parents are at home, maybe physically not what they used to be, and mentally the same kind of a thing. How do you begin that conversation?
So this book's got a couple of different, if your dad is like this, try this approach. If your mom is like this, try this approach,
It
right?
does.
Because there's
I've
no
read them all.
because there's no one size fits all, right? You have to try to match a little bit about the scenario and what's going on with them with kind of their personality types. The first thing I would say is this: don't make the mistake of thinking that you are becoming the parent to your parent. You're not. You're actually never the parent to your parent. You are always the kid. And probably they think that you are kind of dumb too, because the last time they were really thinking about you living in the house, you may have been 17 years old. And frankly, we're all a bit dumb at 17 years old. So remember that they are always still your parent. And they're often a source of advice. So one of the ways in is to say, "Hey, Dad, I've been thinking about my own estate plan. I just, been considering moving or downsizing, or those stairs are getting hard on my 53-year-old knees. I'm trying to make a plan for what to do. I'd love your thoughts. Like, what are you guys doing?" And I'm gonna read you my will. It's out of date. The kids were really young when I did it. I'd love to see yours. Can you have any advice for me on that? Well, parents love to give advice. The other way in is to ask about their friends. They may not
What are
tell
they
you
doing?
straight on. Yeah. So what's Mr. Brown doing these days? Oh, he's not at home anymore. Oh, Mr. Lee's having a hard time on the stairs. Oh, So they will often tell you about their friends where they may not say about themselves, but you can learn an awful lot by um, having that perspective on it.
Yeah, as opposed to dictating, hey, it's time to do this, engage them in a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, once the conversation is started, and let's say they can't live at home anymore for various reasons, how do you go about picking and financing a retirement community? And you describe several communities in the book.
Yes. Um, so the first thing to know is mostly people will live at home and live independently. In fact,
Really?
only depends on where you are in the country. Like 4 to 6% of people will ever live in any kind of congregate care. And that includes 75 people with dementia will always live at home. So the notion that you're probably going to go to a long-term care home is rare. If you ever go to long-term care, which is that publicly funded 24-hour care, that kind of nursing home environment, again, a very, very small fraction of people go there, and usually for a very short period of time, something like 18 months to 2 years. If you're in this country in some of our major areas like Ontario, the waiting list in formally is about 44,000 people to get into long-term care, probably more like 50 or 60,000 of people. And so remember that you really do need to make a plan to age at home wherever possible, because the wait lists are really problematic depending on where you are in the country. They're worse, but they're not good anywhere.
But
So then
aging
there's
at
this,
home can get really expensive, can it?
it can get really expensive. And so let's talk about what the cost for money and time, right? So people say, great, well, I'll just get 24-hour care at home. Well, the cheapest I've ever heard of is about $100,000 a year. It's more like in an urban center, $300,000 a year. And that's not to have a nurse or a doctor. That's to have something like a personal support worker or a healthcare aide with you 24/7. So that was never going to be an easy thing for a lot of people. So what you need to do is kind of cost out what's also in the middle. And many people will say, well, I need some help, but not all the help. So maybe I need some publicly funded home care, which is often not enough. And maybe I'm augmenting it with some home care that I'm paying for privately. And maybe I need to make a plan with other people or try to find out what community-based services I can get. Maybe there's things that are organized by not-for-profit organizations that can come and help me. And the book goes through that. Then let's not forget that middle option, which many of us call retirement homes. Those are typically a private pay option in most jurisdictions, but not Ontario. There can be government subsidies for lower income people who need help to do that, not in Ontario. And they can be really expensive. So when you're thinking about your financial planning, you really have to remember that we plan for the best, but we need to plan for the worst because it can really cost.
Wow, I had no idea the numbers could be that high. Okay, then the other aspect you have to, the transition, I guess, is the difficult part from a home to a retirement community or whatever you choose, and downsizing things. When does that conversation start?
You really need to have that conversation whenever it suits you. It's easy to say to people, oh, you need to have all these things done. Well, let's be real. The book is about being real. It's not about preaching, right? Yeah, you should have all these things done at the age of 18, and in some jurisdictions, even 16. But I mean, that's probably not going to happen. Usually, there's kind of two big things that occur. One, someone gets a diagnosis, or there's a fall, or some type of, acute illness. They end up in the hospital with pneumonia. They fall and break a hip, right? They get a diagnosis of dementia. And that can often be a real trigger then to kind of very quickly figure out all the things that you need to do. And look, that's okay. We're not all perfect people who have everything in plan ahead of time, and we have to be okay with that. You can use that, however, as not just a problem solving for that one person who's in this urgent situation, but use that as a branch to have a conversation about the other people in your family. So if you've got 6 people implicated, maybe only one person needs to fall and break a hip before the other 5 people kind of also get involved in it as well. When you're thinking about staying in the house or downsizing, I think it's important to remember that actually most people can stay at home far more than they need to, and they don't have to do a lot of downsizing. What they need to do is some right sizing. And that means that you may need to look at the house and think, okay, if I do get hurt and I can't get to the basement, can I live on one floor? The answer is often yeah, right? You may not need to move, but you do need a main floor bedroom. Well, people say, well, I don't have an accessible bedroom, or my bedroom's upstairs, or it's down the hall and the hall is very narrow. You know what? No one's eaten in the dining room since 2009. Take the stuff out of the dining room, put an accessible bed in the dining room and some sliding barn-sized doors. Take that powder room that's close to the dining room and make it with a hand shower and change a few things, and you've got an accessible bathroom that you can use for a lot of different things. So this book takes you through a lot of those practicalities. Maybe you get a grad student to move in on something like a home share program. Maybe you offer some exchange of help for some care. So there's lots of ways to stay at home, but stay at home more safely.
Absolutely. But what I find with families, at least that are involved, the closest neighbor, often a daughter, is the one who takes responsibility. How do you deal with your family in some of the care options?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on that. Look, it's
There is.
hard, right? It's really hard. Don't get me wrong. Families are complicated. And the premise of this book is, do you have some kids who hate each other? You're normal. Drug and alcohol abuse? Absolutely normal. People who, are step cousin twice removed, who, are only together at Christmas, yeah, you're normal, right? That this idealized idea of this sort of 1950s TV family, actually, nobody has that family. So let's try to stop pretending that this is what it is, right? One of them may hate your dad. You may not like him much either, but someone's maybe going to do something about it, right? Maybe your sister was abused by your father, and this is the reality of your circumstance. You've got to figure out, well, maybe she shouldn't be involved at all, or maybe none of us should be involved at all. You have to kind of go from who you actually are and not pretend. Okay. And then you're going to start divvying stuff up. So the book's got a whole chapter on how to, if you will, asset map, right? You may think that your unsuccessful brother in the basement who's been sponging off mom and dad for years is really a deadbeat. And in some cases, he might be a deadbeat compared to you, who has a job in the financial sector and can make lots of decisions on your own. But he's there living in the basement, and that means that mom can stay there too. And he comes up 3 times a week and watches Jeopardy with her. And you may not think necessarily, oh, that's really like very helpful, but actually having someone on the ground, having somebody there, even if you're thinking, well, he's kind of sponging. Yeah, might be sponging, but at the same time, it means that there's somebody home, and if they fall, there's someone to call, and there's some socialization, and he takes her to the appointments. So the book goes through different ways of, realistically looking at the types of jobs, and then helps people figure out who's best suited. If no one's best suited, then we have to talk finance, because you're going to have to buy those services.
Yeah. If you got a brother who's a lawyer, have him do the lawyer things.
Right. Or don't, because actually he may, start a whole fight because actually he thinks he knows best, and it drives your parents nuts. Right. So part of what we have to do is meet the family situation as it is, with humor, with appreciation, with understanding that maybe don't talk to dad after 3 o'clock because he's 6 cocktails in, right? That you got to do it in the morning. Maybe, you actually have to do it during a walk and not in the house because somebody's there saying, you won't get rid of my doilies and my figurines, when you're saying, actually, those are really dangerous. You're going to, have those things fall and hurt you, right? So you have to use some different strategies, and the book takes you through some of those.
Okay, my favorite by far, because it was a difficult one to deal with. When do you stop them driving the car?
So there's a reason that's the last chapter in the book, because the first chapter in the book is really, so you open it up and it's about, is mom wobbling on the stairs? How do you age at home, right? How do you do that? That's the first kind of worry. The middle of the book is everything about cognitive impairment. So if you open it up, you can flag that. The very last chapter in the book is about driving, because that is one that people really do worry about. So here's the good news. On the whole, older drivers are pretty good drivers. Even really older drivers are generally pretty safe. They might be driving really slowly and kind of make you crazy if you're behind them, but on the whole, they're not taking crazy risks, right? It's actually the 17-year-olds, often boys who are really the worst drivers in the scenario. And so we have to understand that the risk profile depends on where they're driving. So if they're in a rural community, if they stop driving, that's going to be a huge life shift. So let's start talking about driving safely. And there's some strategies in the book. Blame the headlights, these new LED headlights that they blind you. Well, actually, they do. I find them terrible. Start a conversation. Hey, Dad, I was driving here. I couldn't believe on the highway, all those LEDs. I can't. I'm starting to hate driving at night. It's just so difficult to see. It blinds you. Oh, yeah, I don't like that either. I've decided, Dad, I'm not going to try to drive much at night. Well, yeah, maybe that's a good idea, right? As opposed to saying, Dad, you shouldn't be driving at night anymore unless you have to say that. Drive only in good weather. Drive with good tires. Drive in local communities only. Maybe take yourself off of highways, right? So driving reductions. On the whole, women do that naturally much more. Statistically, this is true. It's actually older men of a certain age that really sometimes have a hard time giving up the license. So you have to understand there's often a lot of pride in that and a lot of sense of independence in that. One thing that I will tell people that is probably not going to happen is your doctor is probably not going to take the license away. That is mostly a myth.
Oh,
no. Doctors hate to do that. They don't feel on the whole that they're qualified to do that. They also know that if they take the driver's license away, that your chance of your dad ever coming back to see the doctor is plummeting. So they don't like to do that. I'm not saying it will never happen. It's just, it's not the easy first thing that many people think it is. So try to start with driving reductions first. Then they may need to requalify depending on how old they are and which jurisdiction they are in. That's a great opportunity to go with mom. And, while you're at the front, remind them that, they did just get that eye test done, which was talking about cataracts or glaucoma or macular degeneration, and kind of maybe make, wiggle noises to the woman behind the counter. So sometimes people will have to do it, and you can then blame the driver's licensing and municipal licensing bureaus, and then the doctor doesn't have to do it. If you actually intervene and say, I'm taking away your keys, you have to understand you actually mostly don't have the right to do that. And it really is a licensing kind of thing. So what I would say is, it's not easy. Try to do harm reduction first. I do not love this tricking of people, but I did put a long list of different tricks that you can use if you have to, like take the alternator out or let the battery run down.
They were all through the book too in various segments. Laura, fascinating book. Where do people access it? Is it just in a bookstore kind of thing?
Yeah, you can get Let's Talk About Aging Parents, a real life guide, in anywhere that really you buy your store. So if you're in Canada, Chapters in Indigo, Kobo, audio books. We have It's on audiobook, it's on ebook. Lots and lots of people are buying 6 and 7 copies and handing it out to their siblings and say, look, chapter 9, we have to deal with chapter 9. That I expected. What I did not expect is that seniors are buying it and handing it out to their adult kids and saying, see, this is none of your business. Stay out of my.
Laura, thank you so much. A great book, great read, and thank you for your time.
Great to be here. Thank you.